So we quickly shift gears from video to podcasting, the future, I guess. So I don't know how it was for all of you, but when I started listening to podcasts, I think a good 6-7 years ago, and it was S-Town and Serial back then, and from the websites themselves or the NPR app, there was no Spotify at that point, and then Spotify came, changed everything, but then it looks like Spotify seems to have miscalculated its bet on podcasts. So I want to start with you, Aditya. What makes you hopeful about podcasts given the way it's worked out for Spotify so far?
It's actually not worked out badly for them, to be honest, because they've built a sizable audience on the back of podcasts. The acquisition of users, which I think was one of the ulterior motives, has worked out. Why we remain hopeful and in fact bullish on podcasts is the growth opportunity, the headroom that is still available. There is already a lot of content that is being supplied. We see a lot of publishers. I mean, Ananth and Indian Express have been the leaders in this, to be honest, for a large part of it. We work with great publishing partners like the Quint, the Sakar Group, Malayalam Manorama. All of them bet big on podcasts. They continue to push it out there. So it finally comes down to how much variety of content is available. Will I find something of interest to me? And it's still in an evolutionary space. I mean, to be honest, in India, podcasts have been around for 6 or 7 years, like you said. And I think that's a very short window to judge the lifespan of something. The active users consuming podcasts in a month today is somewhere in the range of 70 to 80 million users, which I think is a sizable number. Now, how do you go from 70 to 200 is subject to content distribution. Distribution is largely solved. Content supply, variety, regional languages which haven't been entirely tapped yet will have a large role to play over the next couple of years. So there's a lot of opportunity, and I think there's enough work happening. Whether it happens in a month or a year or 5 years, that depends on demand supply, but there's no reason to write this off as yet. There's still a lot of opportunity.
Ananth, if I can bring you in here, Indian Express has multiple podcasts. There's the short one, which is three things.
Or it's the long one.
That's the long one. So you can plug in the others. But what I want to ask you is, from a consumption standpoint, how many listens do you get in a month? How do you compare that with the total consumption of Indian Express, the app perhaps? What is a fair comparison that you can give us to the consumption of the podcast and Indian Express digital? And then the final question that I want to come to you is the podcasting business paying for itself yet?
Okay. A lot of questions. First of all, thank you for mentioning S-Town. It's my favorite ever podcast. And I think each one of us that got into podcasts was either because of Serial or because of S-Town. Okay. I can't give you a number. And I want to talk about this because this is something that's bothered me for a very long time. And it surrounds the transparency around numbers. And it's just not us, it's everybody in the industry, right? So for example, I'll give you, let's say X brand comes to me and they see my numbers, right? Now, the obvious thing for someone who doesn't work in the audio industry is to compare it to videos, right? And there is no clear comparison there. And unless and until each one of us, everyone in the industry talks openly about their numbers, it's not going to happen, right? Because let's say, for example, what is the standard of a good working podcast? Like, how do you measure what's good? And there's no answer to that primarily because there's no transparency. Nobody shares this number. We don't have a YouTube sort of a space where you can just go and openly check how many views somebody got. And so I think from an industry point of view, we need to solve this problem first, which is the transparency and, what is the standard of a good podcast? Because I can, blow my horn and say, I'm the #1 podcast, and there's no way I can back that up, and tomorrow somebody else can say that. Incidentally and ironically, I saw this LinkedIn post where somebody said, oh, we've been around for 3 years and we've done 1 million views, 1 million listens, and that just made me laugh because, we do so much more than them in a couple of months. But again, I can't prove it unless, everyone knows the numbers. So that's one, I can't answer that. Sorry for the long response. The second question was how does the app comes in, right?
Yeah, and is it self-sustaining?
That's the third question. The second question, the app is doing well, which I would say about 25% of our total consumption happens on the app. And we're pushing it big time in terms of the entire revamp, making it a good experience for the listener. On the third question, I don't know if I'm at the liberty of saying that, but it cuts quite close, is what I would say, because we are a very lean team to begin with.
Rohan, I want to bring you in and talk about brands and how they use the audio medium. And I remember, how we all use Spotify, although, and maybe other streaming apps as well. Even though it's an audio medium, the app also delivers video ads. There are those images. There's so much else as inventory on audio. So the effectiveness of audio as a medium for advertising, there has always been radio, and that argument can be made. But from a streaming standpoint, how are brands looking at the effectiveness of podcasts, and therefore, ads that run during podcasts or even on streaming platforms and ads related to it? What's their outlook towards it?
So I think for the agencies largely, I think there has been a trend, right? One is a trend of number, right? 1 million at one point used to be a magic number. It used to have some vanity to say I have reached 1 million users, 1 million views. Today it means nothing, right? A film teaser coming out makes about, 50 million views within just 48 hours. For agencies, I think it was always about going behind the audiences where they are, right? Now, the classic way of, whether you go programmatic, whether you go video, whether you go audio. But what changed is, I think even now, brands have started asking that question, right? I think it is more catching up with trends also. Just because a podcast with Ranveer has become very popular, and why has that become popular also is that you don't see the entire podcast, but you see snippets of that on social. And then you go back to looking at the whole content, right? So somewhere, I think the curiosity helping podcast grow is also social. And I think people, and with massive 600 million smartphone, low cost of data, enough mentioned here. For agencies, now we have started seeing investments behind audio was always there. Now, investments behind audio on dedicated podcast is happening, right? So people, now whether it is entertainment, now today even podcast, if you see, one is a very conversational, one is very monologue centric, one is very non-fiction, one is very thought leadership, conversation between two people, right? Podcast always had a view of only audio content. But now people have understood that here, even if it's long, about 30 minutes, people are paying attention. So I think brands want to ensure where people are attentive and listening, get your placement there. I think the mantra won't change for the agencies at least. Now this is getting prominence.
Okay. Aditya, can you tell us, is branded content the main revenue driver for podcasts, or we also have host reads and things like that? So what is the format that is most popular, and is it branded content?
For now, yes, branded content is one of the largest drivers of revenue into this space. As an ecosystem, I wouldn't say market, as an ecosystem, there is still a level of maturity that needs to come before host reads become prevalent. The way host reads are ideally sold, or should be ideally sold, is very strong connect between the brand and the content and the creator. Then that affinity which a host read will drive for the listener, which is trust, is much easier. You don't have to sell it. What we tend to typically see right now is a lot of commoditization, that host read is a unit of advertisement that we are selling. And that is where the disconnect happens. So for example, someone's doing a food podcast, but because there is an ad spot, you're running a car ad. The audience hasn't come for that. And that's where the disconnect and the lack of response might happen. So this maturity from a creator and an advertiser point of view needs to happen, because both of them are right now thinking very tactically to some extent. The other opportunity, which is growing very, very fast, is of course over a period of time, subscriptions will start to play a role. Now again, there are some tech barriers to be overcome here as yet, but we're not very far. Honestly, we've been running experiments and we are seeing some positive impact of that. But that doesn't mean that brands don't have a role to play in this. Subscription content is a type of content, branded content has another purpose to serve. And just like we see with OTT, television, all these different mediums, there is a way to coexist and prosper together. So that's how I think the future will be. But branded content is a very, very strong opportunity.
Ananth, if I can bring you in, given that Indian Express is a news platform, so branded content, how big of a role, if Ananth is saying that, if Aditya is saying that branded content is perhaps the largest piece out there, how much of it can you as a news platform leverage? And the disconnect he's saying in a food show running and then there being a car ad. I remember the first ad that I heard on the Indian Express app was a Vico Vajradanti ad, and it made no sense to me at all when I was listening to
Programmatic.
So how do you tackle this?
Okay, that's a very good question. I mean, if we can control some of the programmatic and direct sales, we'll always choose brands which align with our value as far as host feeds are concerned. Now that is where we draw the line, right? Because our daily show, we have the top journalists coming in, right? And let's say, for example, they selling a Vico Vajradanti just doesn't fit in. And also it cuts through the credibility of the real journalism that we preach, right? And so it doesn't work. However, for like a pre-roll or a post-roll, that might work because it's not part of the show. When it comes to branded content and, so for example, we did this NASCOM podcast last year, which was out and out branded, which could be something like an advertorial, right? But at the same time, it's not part of the Three Things show. It doesn't use the theme. It doesn't have the same host. It's consider this as a different programming on a channel, right? So where, let's just say I have a TV channel running and I have the 9 to 9:30 slot free and I run like a branded show there. So it's got nothing to do with it. And that's how, we sort of make peace with content that maybe doesn't align with the show. And as far as the content not aligning with the brand, we just don't go ahead with that.
And Rohan, can you tell us the budgets that are being set aside for podcasts and ads of the nature that Aditya and Ananth are talking about? Is it experimental budgets, or are these serious budgets that brands are expecting something to come out of it, or it's just let's see where this goes and then?
No, I think two different set of clients, right? There are clients who are continuing to be very performance centric. For them, they don't mind experimenting in some of these aspects, but it doesn't really feature. Our investments going towards podcasts, not necessarily audio, yes. But then comes the second aspect where now brands have started coming in saying, it's just not advertisement spots on a podcast, but it is creating content around that, right? That is becoming more prominent. So they don't mind even going the non-conventional route of finding a host and creating an entire piece of content by themselves. There they are not worried about budgets. There they want to do a very good job. Once they do that, now again, it's important, right? They need to promote that equally. The other podcasts still have a loyal, listener base, highly attentive. Tying up with some of these is obviously a way of going about, but we have not been getting too many briefs around, saying existing podcasts. Now, Spotify, those are some that de facto happen. So in short, audio definitely doing very strong. placements within audio now on podcast is becoming a conversation. I still feel there is a big ground to cover for the agencies and brands to have a definitive way of, finding what works. And how do you even measure that, right? Because sometimes that life cycle could be a little longer.
Aditya, I want to come to you. One point that Rohan mentioned a few minutes back was that how it's these short clips of podcasts. I mean, they're basically shorts or short form video that's actually driving curiosity for the podcast. Do you think that those who are watching those short videos actually go check out those long 1 hour long or 3 hour long episodes? Amit Verma now has a video podcast, whatever, right? So I can't imagine someone sitting and watching a 5 hour long YouTube video. So how does this marriage between shorts and podcasting work? And if you want your podcast to be successful right now in the time that we are, do they need to go the Ranveer Allahabadia way and make, or please expunge that? So that do they need
I
to
won't
make
comment
shorts?
on that. So to your first question, do short form clips lead to long form consumption? I think it's a very, very proven technique through movies. Trailers drive footfalls to longer format movies. It's the same principle where I'm using shorter format content to create awareness and to create a pull. Now, in a trailer, it's a skill these days. You're aware that creating a trailer is a separate skill from creating a movie. That is, the intent is very clear. I want to use this trailer to drive curiosity, create word of mouth, and drive footfall and ticket sales. That's very clear, which is exactly what the short format of this is intended to do. To your second question, do people watch long form content? 100%. To give you some data, content that exceeds 30 minutes duration has completion rates of between 60 to 80%. People are willing to commit that much time, and this is inherent to audio as a medium. Now, whether this happens on YouTube is a whole other question, because that is a two-sensory medium. In audio, where primary consumption is passive, 30, 40, 45 minutes is no problem. We regularly, we release 1,000 pieces of content a month right now, and there are routinely pieces of content that are 30, 40, 50 minutes. Nobody's blinking. We are seeing very high completion rates in audio because commute time, someone's hit play and it's playing. I don't know how many of you have heard of a show called Empire Podcast. If you haven't, please listen to it. 50 minutes, 60 minutes long with historians talking about history, talking about 500-year-old things. Fantastic conversations. Every episode is an hour and almost 90% completion rates. So the first thing I think to figure out on where audio stands is to not compare it with other medium. Just the way we don't compare a movie's success by saying, will a movie succeed because it is made in 16:9 and IMAX, so will Oppenheimer succeed on television? It's not made for that. It's made for a different experience. So the success metrics and benchmarks are very different.
And how do you market the podcasts that you make? Are you using videos? How do you excite people about podcasts?
Right, so that's a very good question. Primarily, we use Indian Express, the app, our notifications, all the traditional ways, right? And then there's also a very popular Indian Express newsletter that goes out in the morning and the evening, right? So whatever big we have one permanent slot in the newsletter, which is the open rate is quite high and also the click-through rate. So that's primarily how we market internally. We also have slots for special episodes, the cubes, the random stuff. Now, outside Indian Express, the other way of promoting, let's say some episodes is obviously the IVM way, where, one, we are a network and we have several shows. So we do cross promotions, and it could be a top read or a mid slot. Do we do videos? Not always, and that's primarily because of a resource constraint. But in an ideal world, yes, we should. We've done that for some, but again, it has, and this was your previous question to Aditya, actually, it's not really worked for us because in our, one, it is a different skill set altogether, and two, it's very difficult to get somebody out of that, constant scrolling and visit a different website. So I do not agree with Aditya there. I think it's a lost game that I think nobody has cracked yet.
And Rohan, some closing remarks from you on one, has the community of podcasters, have they done enough to build excitement around this format and the kind of content it offers, like you were saying, there's thought leadership, there are these long, slow conversations, there is so much to offer here. So has enough been done, and is that the major gap in getting brands also excited? Is it that the community has possibly not done enough? Is that something?
Slightly answering this differently, I think there is so much of content overload and so much less attention that people have today that I think the constant need to scroll and consume content is where they are working well in creating curiosity. But I think on the other side, serious podcast listeners, about 30 minutes, sticking to that content and maybe across 2 sessions, I think for those people, I think there is still a lot to be done for them to be actually seen as mainstream, but definitely very attentive audience, because they might be in the gym, they might be just taking care of something at home, but purely switching on and listening to high value content. Like imagine someone looking through a BFSI finance centric 1 hour thing, he's very seriously occupied, as against going to a finance portal who can be anyone, one of us. We may or may not have that level of interest in what is being spoken about, right? So I feel there is still enough to be done. I mean, even agencies, brands, content creators, everyone's trying to create the blueprint. I don't think there is a blueprint yet, but I'm very hopeful that this is going to be successful.
And then there is the measurement puzzle, which hasn't been cracked for video. So I think, Ananth, you'll have to wait longer for audio to really make, some waves there.
Or maybe we get into videos and start producing video content, video podcasts.
Amazing. Great. Time's up, and thank you so much, all of you. I think we definitely have a few ways where the podcasting industry can work on. There's measurement, there's the videos, video podcasting, etc. And nice way to wrap up today. Maybe this could have been a podcast.
Actually.